Let's cross now to Gulliver Cragg in Kyiv. Gulliver, 100 days in terms of this war. So how is the mood in the Ukrainian capital this Friday?
Well, I'm in the centre of Kyiv right now, and I hope you can see behind me, it's really bustling. A very large proportion of the city's residents have now returned, and normal life in some way has come back, except that for almost all people, I would imagine, in the Ukrainian capital, life is not really normal because everybody knows what's going on in the Donbass. And after the Ukrainian army's successes in repelling the Russian attack on Kyiv region and other parts of northern Ukraine, they're having a lot more difficulty in resisting Russian advances in the east of the country. And Ukrainians are beginning to realize that this could be a very long and drawn out war. Perhaps many of them thought that already, but that conclusion is growing, whilst hopes that it could actually be over by the summer are definitely fading. And then there's the fact that Ukrainian authorities have started to talk about Ukrainian casualties, and President Zelensky has been admitting regularly now that Ukraine is losing up to 100 soldiers a day, with up to 500 being wounded. That's a huge number, even if you believe that it is less, significantly less than the losses that the Ukrainians are inflicting on the Russians, and that may be the case. I mean, it's just a terrible thing for people all over Ukraine to have to be thinking about all of the time, plus of course the suffering of civilians, so many of whom have lost their homes, so many of whom have been killed. So this is a country which, even in the best case scenario, is going to be deeply, deeply traumatized for decades to come by what is happening.
Now, given the atrocities Ukraine has experienced in the last 100 days, Gulliver, is there anybody at all in the country that supports Russia?
Well, I saw an opinion poll that said 2% of Ukrainians still had positive opinions towards Russia. That was published a few days ago. And it also said that 80% of those who may have had positive feelings towards Russia before the invasion had changed their mind. But I'm not sure how much we can trust polling that is done in wartime. Anecdotal evidence, though, people I have spoken to certainly would suggest that a large proportion of those Ukrainians who still had pro-Russian sentiments, at least to some degree, before the 24th of February, now don't. I mean, you hear so often people saying, we'll never forgive them. You hear so often people just really wanting to tell you how much they hate them, and how much they don't only hate Putin, but how they hate all Russians, how they blame every single person apart from those who had the courage to take part in anti-war protests in Moscow and St. Petersburg and other cities in Russia. And Ukrainians are aware that that is a tiny proportion of the Russian population. So I've also heard Ukrainians who are Russian speakers, for whom Russian is their first language, telling me that they don't want to speak Russian anymore, that they're struggling to improve their Ukrainian. However, I do not think that this is actually everybody, because Ukrainians that I have spoken to, including Anna Zaitseva, who I interviewed in Bukovel in western Ukraine, who was in a bunker for 65 days under Azovstal in Mariupol, she said that about a third of the people there stuck to their pro-Russian views, despite the fact that they were bombarded by the Russian armed forces. She said that they would blame Ukraine and say that this was all theatre, that the Ukrainians were putting on really quite absurd theses, she said, that they would be putting forward, but she described them as zombified by Russian propaganda. And what we've got to remember is that that Russian propaganda is working as hard as it possibly can now in the areas of Ukraine, that 1/5 of the country, according to President Zelensky, that Russia currently occupies. And I have heard people coming out of Kherson region also talking about collaborators down there in southern Ukraine. So I think that there will be a certain proportion of Ukrainians who, despite everything, maintain some kind of pro-Russian sentiment or believe basically the Russian narrative about this. Certainly the Russians to try to convince those in the areas of Ukraine that they do occupy of that Russian narrative.
Gulliver Cragg reporting there from Kyiv. Thank you.